I'm Tim Ellis. I, along with JC Nebel, run the project. We run it in a way that JC is the student-facing tutor, module leader for the project, and I'm the staff-facing one. So I deal with things like allocating people or noting who people choose as a supervisor. Well, we've already been through that process, and you should all be, apart from maybe a few of you, aware of who your project supervisor is. But I do that process, and I then do all the things around the timing associated with how staff engage with the project. So JC is your main point of contact, and you should all be aware of JC, where he is, how you can find him, his consultation hours, in other words, when he's expecting to be in his room, never guaranteed. And if you know you want to go and see him, then the best thing to do is drop an email and say, can I come along on one of the slots in particular? And if for any particular reason you can't make exactly those slots, then say so and ask if you can find another time, and I'm sure he'll be able to accommodate. But don't just turn up and knock on his door and say, oh, he wasn't in, he's never there, can't find him. Those are the times when we are expecting to be able to provide support and help on every module, so not just the project module. Okay, so as I say, the project module is a module which is different from all the other ones that you've done so far in your degree. In that what it is about is you being able to demonstrate what you've learnt on the course, how you've learnt and how you can apply that knowledge to a problem that in the main you select. So what we're trying to do is to get you to pick a topic you're interested in. And the reason for that is the things you're interested in, you're prepared to put the effort in. And as I say, the project is in something of a unique document for you as you go forward, because should be a complete piece of work you could show to somebody else. It's not only the work that you put into it, but it's the way you report that work. And that you should look on as a document that you can use to help you persuade employers to offer you a job. So it's an important part of your final year project, but actually it's one of the few things that you carry through with you, apart from the grade that you get when you completed your project, your degree. So that's what the project is about. How do you take the skills and knowledge you've acquired and apply them? Now, one of the things that we have an expectation of in a project is that you've acquired some project management skills. And the project gives you a way of being able to then exercise those skills in terms of how you use your time, of how you understand how you go through the process of undertaking a project. Now, you may all be sitting there thinking, oh, that's an easy thing to do, I know how to manage my time. It's the most single reason people don't do well on their project. And end of every year, half of my project students will say, I wish I'd used my time better from the start, not just over the last 2 weeks before the hand-in. So if there's one single message I like to get across to you, apart from all the stuff we're going to tell you about today, is make sure that you are planning the way you're going to use your time. Because at the end of the day, the mark you get is reflecting the effort you've put into it. So if you don't put the effort in, you will inevitably not get a good mark. So it is about you being able to manage your own project. And you'll have a talk next week about managing your project from Graham Jones. He'll also give you a talk on how to manage your supervisor, or what he means is, how do you manage the time you get with your supervisor? Again, it's one of those times when you have an opportunity to use a one-to-one, face-to-face interaction with one of the members of staff that is there trying to support your project. So make the best use of that. And I will reiterate it again, we don't say things lots of times just for the fun of it. It's because people don't seem to take any notice of it, or if they do, they don't understand how to use it. So try not to start off thinking, I actually don't need to see this guy every week or every 2 weeks. I'll see him in the beginning of the project and I'll see him a couple of weeks before I'm due to give him my report. That'll be enough. And it never is. So try not to use the time that somebody's offering to you in that way. Be productive. Use some of the things they suggest. And for those that do a programming project, actually for everybody, there is always a programming element in the project. There'll be people sitting out there saying, I'm going to do a design project. And as you'll find later on, design projects are not just about design. You have to show your design is practical. and works. So you have to show some evidence for it. So even a design project is not just about design. You have to prove to the people that you're trying to prove, who are the markers of your project, that you understand what the implications are of a design. It's not a paper study. Okay, so what you'll find in the module guide, which is up on Study Space, well, is that set of aims, and then this set of what's called learning objectives. These are the things that you're expected to gain from doing a project well. How to plan and manage and control, as well as its critical appraisal. The last part of a project report is you doing a critical review of how well you think you've performed. And what's important there is not that you spend all your time saying how good you think the project is, but where you made your mistakes. Because the reality is we only really learn from the things we do wrong, when we know we've done them wrong. The things we do right, we've already learned from. We've already learned that in the past. So what you get from a project is where you made the mistakes. And so a critical review is to give you a chance to reflect on that. And maybe, and I always think the best way of saying this to a student when we get to that point is to say, well, if you started again, would you do it differently? And if so, how would you do it differently? What have you learned from this process of the project? So think about that as well. So critical appraisal is an important part of it for you to look back and say, did I do as well as I could have done? And if not, how would I have done it better? To learn how to investigate and analyse a problem, ideally one you define yourself though, in many cases we encourage students to find a client for a project. In other words, somebody from which they can elicit information which they're not aware of beforehand. Because that process of elicitation and how you define requirements and how you build a project through an analysis stage is also quite important. Now, it's not essential. You can develop projects through your own ideas or through ideas that your supervisor has helped you with. But having a real, what we call a live client, somebody that you can work with, has this interaction, which is as much part of a project as the work that you actually do. Understanding how you manage both the expectation of the clients and then also deliver something that they can find usable at the end of it. The idea is that you can apply the techniques that you've learned on the course, relevant techniques. So you get taught lots of things on your 3-year degree. They're not all going to apply to this one project. So you have to be selective and say, this is a useful tool. I'm going to apply this one. I'm going to use it in a way that makes sense to the project and I'm going to get value from it. So you have to be able to systematically apply relevant techniques in designing a solution. And in doing so, you have to ensure that you understand how other people may have tried to tackle that problem in the past. And that process is around looking at the literature in whatever sense that means. It may be in publications, it may be in other software that other people have written, but you're intended to go and explore those things before you start saying, what's my idea? You take the example of an app. Maybe an app's not such a good example because you're all familiar with apps. So you build up your own perspective on what an app should be and how it should work. But if you take something slightly outside of that you don't know much about, say how a business manages its financial operations, you need to go and investigate that. You need to understand not only how people do that, but in what ways they've tried to solve that problem in the past. So those are techniques that you need to bring into a project. All projects should have an implementation of some sort. We divide the project into 3 primary groups. We have a build project. A build project does what it says on the box. It's going to build a system, a piece of software that you can then validate and show to work. We have design projects. Design projects are not just about designing, because a build project requires a design. But a design project is going to be more associated with the design process and design principles. We'll come back to it. And finally, we have a research project. Now, a research project is not just going out and finding out about things. It's not just a paper study. A research project is looking to develop new knowledge. And so we mean research in the academic sense that we, as academics, and JC will talk to you about it, undertake research to find out new things. My area of research is computer vision, visual surveillance. So I look at different ways that algorithms can be used to detect, in my case, vehicles moving through the roads. And so I would, if I had a research project in that area, I would want the student to find out what sorts of things have been done on a particular part of that problem, and then look to see how they could provide their own solutions and implement that through a set of experiments. So those are the three main types of projects. And your aim is to go through a process that ends up then with something physical, some sort of prototype that you can demonstrate. Now the expectations on a design project are much less than those on a build project. But nevertheless, don't go away thinking I can do a design project and not do any programming. Or at least not do any implementation, because lots of design projects might use some of the myriad of very sophisticated tools that mean you don't have to sit down and write pages of Java, but nevertheless require you to design and then build something and show it working. So that's where you should be putting your thoughts. And then to be able to write an effective report. Something that describes to somebody who knows nothing about your project what it is you've actually done, how you made the choices you made, and how you went about doing it. So the report is a documentation of your process, of your project. And we have some relatively formal ways of describing that, which break it down into saying what the problem is, saying how other people have tried to solve that problem, putting forward your own solution, implementing that solution, having designed your system, and then finally testing it to show that it works and where it fails. But remembering that it's a project. It's a final year undergraduate project. It's not a 10-year software project for a team of software engineers. So there's a scope to a project which fits into what the size of a final year project should be. And finally, to be able to demonstrate through that production of your documentation that you can actually do that. These days, that's almost the easiest part of it, because the software around like Word does most things for you, producing good documentation. You still have to write it though. The content is yours. So we go through some of this. Some of it is repeated. So these are just some of the things I've said, not accidentally. They want to still be there to remind you of what the project is about. So as I say, try and pick something you're interested in, because you're going to spend the next 6 months doing it. If you're not interested in it, and it's not a challenging project, why bother? All right, you'll say I have to do it because my degree requires it. But that's not the way you get the real value from a project. The real value you get is when you pick something you've got a little bit of a passion for, and you put that time and effort in. And that comes out at the end of the day in what you actually achieve. This says much of the same thing, except maybe the last bit. It's about showing some level of professionalism. You're expecting, I assume, when you've finished your year this year at university, to go through and start and get a job. And so the project, again, in the way that you manage it and the way you write it up, should be a professional document that you produce at the end of the day. Something you're proud to show somebody, rather than something that you whipped off in the last few days before the submission. So try and put that planning process in. And the way that we look at a project, the way the staff look at a project when we mark it, and the way we consider a project, is also that it's what we call a synoptic assessment of your course. In other words, it's meant to encompass as much of what you've actually done over the 3 years of your course as possible. And as I say, not everything is going to be relevant, but it's your purpose to look out and find out how you go back and look through what you've been taught and bring that into the project. Whether it be in your analysis, in your design, in your implementation, in your testing, all of those things are things that you should be bringing to the project, and that's what we mark. When you write a project, it may seem a bit daunting. You've got to write 60, 70 pages of documentation, your project report. And some people think, well, I could spend a few chapters of that just bringing in old stuff that's in the books, the stuff we've been taught. You don't really get any marks for stuff that you don't write that isn't about your project. All of that we can read and say, all right, he understands the waterfall method, and he understands agile methods, and he knows how to find where they are in the literature and hopefully write it in his own words, because if he doesn't, then he gets caught for plagiarism. But all of those things are not the important thing. The important thing is how you use them and how you make use of the information. So think about that when you write up your project. If you put in lots of stuff of what we call boilerplating, then we just skip over it. That we don't need to mark, because it's not yours. What we want to mark is what you've done. So you could say, well, it's only worth 25% of your final year's mark. But as I say, it's more important than that in terms of what it says about you. And more important in terms of how you may want to go on to do, say, maybe a master's course or a PhD. This is all good training for that as well. Okay? I've got a slide right at the end that tells you how to fail a project. Useful, I think. But this one is perhaps the interim for that, of what you should be putting into the project, and if you don't, then you'll be back into that, how to fail a project. So, as I say, top of the list is always time management. It's always that people leave it too late. They start today and think, I've got 6, nearly 7 months to do my project. It's ages. I don't even need to start it until Christmas. And that's why we have a project proposal deadline, 2 weeks on Friday. So you can start off by saying, these are the discussions, these are the ideas I had on my project, this is the timescales that I need, this is a calendar of my events. We then have an early prototype demo before Christmas. So just before Christmas, you have to show something working of your project ideas. Even if it's a design project, you should be showing something around, say, the user interface and how the user is meant to be able to work with this back-end software that you're designing. So that comes before Christmas. So the time and effort you're meant to put into a project, and this is actually true of any module, is estimated at 10 hours a week, over 30 weeks. So if you don't do your 10 hours one week, in terms of the effort into your project, then you've got to find that somewhere else. It's a nominal 10 hours, one might say, but it's a reflection of what the level of effort that's expected to be that goes into a project. And when you look at it and say, okay, it's only 300 hours in total. Nevertheless, that's the bit where people often make mistakes in terms of how much effort and time they put into their project. And then the second thing is because you don't go and get good advice. Now, to be honest, there are some people who can get through a project without going and speak to their supervisors. I've had occasional projects in the past that have delivered really good projects, people who really know what they're doing and why they're doing it, and think, well, I don't really need to go and see my supervisor. Big mistake in general. Even if you know exactly what you're doing, it's worth keeping your supervisor on board. And part of the reason for that is you get 10% of your marks for understanding how you manage your time and your interaction with people like your supervisor. So 10% of your project marks just come from you being able to be shown to managing that in an appropriate way, to be able to both take advice and to use that advice and to feed it back in terms of the work and the progress that you make. So make sure you see your project supervisor regularly, or at least that you have an appropriate means of communication with them. Even if you don't meet face-to-face with them all the time, that you're happy to interact with them by email or by phone or whatever communication system you use these days. Okay, so there are other people. Your supervisor is not your only advisor on this project. All the other members of staff are also there. We have people that have different areas of expertise, and if you've got a particular problem, not a nice, simple, general problem, like how do I use databases, but how do I make my database do this particular thing, go and speak to one of the people that you know that teach databases, or that do research in databases. Make use of the resource that is here. Don't just say, my supervisor doesn't know. The supervisor is not meant to be your fountain of knowledge in everything you need to do. They are there to guide you and give you suggestions, but they're not there to solve your problems and to know the answers to all of your questions. So as I say, this is why my one interactive slide for this session. Your project is a journey for you in understanding and discovering what you're going to do. And so you start off from somewhere and you're looking to get to the summit. And the route that you take is the journey that you make. Part of what you have to do is to identify milestones on the way. Things that say, when I've got to this point, I've done something achievable and it sets me up to do the next thing. And those milestones then have to be mapped out, and this is how you plan your project. As it says here, the staff are here to help you and to give you advice, but not to carry your load. That's what you have to do as part of your project. So make sure you understand what it is that you're needing to do. Should have been an evangelist, shouldn't I? Okay, Does anybody not know what plagiarism is? Put your hand up if you're not sure what the word means or what it implies. Okay? I sort of thought that. I'm going to skip over this one. You know what it is. You know that the work that you submit will be submitted through Turnitin. Turnitin will find every link or reference that you've taken from somewhere else. If it's a couple of words, it's obviously not relevant. If it's a couple of sentences, it's not. But if it's whole paragraphs or whole chapters, and people still submit with that in their projects, Turnitin finds it, and we have an investigation. And if it's decided you did that deliberately, then you fail the course. And the failing may simply be that you have to retake all of your project again, or that you're asked by the university to withdraw from the course, especially if it's not a first offence. So bear it in mind. Don't just copy and paste stuff off the web. And in fact, my own approach to it is if you copy and paste stuff off the web, I just don't mark it. It's not yours. We're after the things that you do that are important. So these are the aspects of plagiarism. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. If you're not by level 6, then you've lived a very charmed life. But it may not end. It may end. Okay. So this is what you're trying to demonstrate in your project. The things that you can do, and how you apply your knowledge, and how you show that knowledge can be built into something that you can make work in some way. So when you meet with your supervisor, and you need to do that quickly, as I say, you've got your first deadline 2 weeks on Friday. So you need to start understanding what your project is going to be about and how you're going to go about doing it, and deciding what the timescales are for it. And from that, the best way, in my experience, to do that is to go and meet with your supervisor, start those initial discussions, and feedback your documents to him as you write your proposal. If you write a proposal and the day before the deadline and submit it on the deadline and don't get any feedback on it, then you can justifiably expect to get a poor mark. So try and make use of the feedback that you can get from your supervisor in terms of saying, a few days beforehand, we would normally say a week, but for the proposal that's almost not possible given the timescales we start with, but certainly for the final report, a couple of weeks beforehand, give them a draft and get them to give you some feedback. They won't, I don't, correct your spelling mistakes or your English, but they will go through and say, you haven't got anything on this bit probably got too much on it, and you've ignored some of these issues. So try and gain some of that feedback, on the basis that the person that you're then getting feedback from is also going to give you a mark for it. So if his advice is wrong, then that's going to be reflected in his mark. But make the best use of them. As it says at the bottom there, you'll get this again next week from Graham. Meeting with your supervisor is as much your responsibility as it is the supervisor's. They obviously have to be available, but you have to make the effort to set times and to agree when that's going to happen. Lots of different ways that you can start your project if you don't have any ideas, and usually one of the commonest issues at this time of the year is that somebody doesn't know what they want to do for their final year project, and that's where you have lots of sources of information, of family and friends, of communities that you may be involved with, of your own interests in life that may have a particular aspect that you could try and solve. Some of the academic staff put up topics on Blackboard, and you'll be able to find out where those are on study space. But certainly through discussion with your supervisor. If you can't think of something to do, go and talk with him, and he'll almost certainly have some suggestions. And that's where you need to start. Okay. So, you're the one responsible for your project. That's why we call it an individual project. Make sure you arrange regular meetings. If you're not able to attend, make sure you let the supervisor know. I do that every year. I arrange regular meetings with my students, and always there'll be some that don't turn up. And I almost certainly know if they don't turn up for my next meeting, they won't turn up for the one after that or the one after that. And they always tell me is, I didn't get anything done this time, so there wasn't anything to tell you. Actually, that's the best reason to go along, to let your supervisor tell you that you're now behind with your work. You know that. How do you get forward with it? How do you move on from it? So try and ensure that when you set up meetings, you go, because just not having done much work is not a good excuse. Your supervisor, in a sense, doesn't care. They literally don't care. What you get from your project is the mark that you want to achieve. My colleague, Dimitris Makris, has a technique when he talks with students, when they come for their first project meeting. And he says to them, okay, so what sort of a mark do you want for this project? What sort of a grade do you think you want for it? I haven't heard anybody not say, I want a first-class grade. And so he says, okay, so these are the things that you need to do to get a first-class project mark. And we would love to have everybody getting a first-class project mark. And if you follow the guidelines of what a project supervisor will tell you about, and you are industrious and put the time in, you can achieve that. But what really happens in the end is that people just don't put the time and the effort in general. So meetings with your supervisor provide you with that opportunity to refresh and, as it were, reinvigorate the things you're trying to do and try and guide you along the right path. So your responsibility. And if you can, make sure you come prepared. Make sure you come along not saying, I'll sit down and let him ask me some questions. You're the one who should be asking the questions. You should be proactive in your project meetings. And do you know why? Because it's your project, it's not my project. Make sure you attend the project lectures. As I say, we will be videoing them, so you will have the advantage to peruse them online. But they provide, again, the opportunity for you to interact with the academics. It's not so easy this time. The aim when we've actually got things that are more technical subjects, my intention at least for the project lectures, is they give people a chance to ask questions. So I try and ask the academics not to present for 2 hours, but maybe to present for 50 minutes and get some feedback and some question going from the people in the audience. And of course, observe your deadlines. So, role of supervisors, I've been through most of this, so I'm going to skip through it fairly quickly. We try not to change supervisors. People come along to us, usually in week 3 or 4, and say, my supervisor doesn't know anything about the topic I'm doing my research and my project on, I'd like to change it. And in general, we don't expect supervisors to know a level of detail that you need to complete your project in particular technical areas. That's not their role. As I already said, there are plenty of other people you can go and talk to if you have very specific technical requirements in your projects. But they don't have to be your supervisor every time. And he will be able to advise you on that. He'll be able to advise you who you should go and speak to solve particular problems you may have. So that's the other reason to keep in contact with them. And try and make sure you keep those meetings regular. So they will be able to advise you how to tackle it. They should be responsive to your emails, as we expect for all academic staff. They should be able to advise on their own availability, because they may also be at times when they're not available. They're there primarily to help you monitor and review your progress against your project timetable. And the best way of doing that is usually with a face-to-face meeting, because they can say, well, what have you done? How have you done it? Where do you think you should go next? If it's done by email, it's a rather stilted conversation, as you'll know. So if you can make the majority of them face-to-face meetings, you will get more from them. The supervisor should also be there to give you feedback on draft documents, but only if you give them to them in enough time. You know, half an hour before the submission time, you're going to get nothing. Even a day or so may not be, because we end up being fairly busy as well. So try and make sure you manage your supervisor and the time you want for them appropriately. And your supervisor will then mark every element of your project, along with a second marker who also looks at your report and sits in on your viva. Okay, so I'm going to go through this briefly because I've talked a little bit about it. We do have 3 types of project. A build project, of which the primary objective is to develop some form of software application. And we would expect the majority of students that are doing a computer science degree or a software engineering degree to be doing a build project, because that's what your course is about. In other words, building a reasonably substantial application of some functionality. For those that are on an information systems degree, it may be much more likely that your interests are in designing sophisticated information systems. And so there, a design project would be more appropriate. Though it might also apply to a design associated, say, with a network, where you're going to be using network simulation tools. So that also has more the character of a design project than a build project, and the tools it will use to be able to simulate and be able to provide evidence for the design that you have are also then simulation tools rather than programming tools. And then finally, a research project. And as I said before, a research project is effectively an experimental project. You set up some hypotheses, you design some experiments, you apply your algorithms and get some results to data, and then you do some analysis of that. And JC will talk more about that. It won't necessarily be a methodology that you're all that familiar with. My first degree was physics. Physics is largely based, at least the bit I did, is largely based on experimentation, on being able to validate things about the world. And so a lot of my degree was about doing these sorts of projects, where you start with a hypothesis, you design your experiment, you collect your data, you analyse your data, and then you interpret your results. And that's what a research project is about, as JC will say later. Project assessment, we have a first marker. They will mark all of your work, whereas the second marker just looks at the report and attends the viva. Feedback on those pieces of work you will get through your project meetings with your project supervisor, but we also have an online system, this thing down here, which I call PPMS. Do you all know Pushpar Kumarapalli? Pushpar's developed a project management system, so Pushpar's project management system is what I call it. We've had some slight hiccup with it over the summer, but he assures me it will be up and running by tomorrow, and at that point we can then more effectively see exactly who's made starts on their project. So project assessment, divided into essentially 4 components. You have a proposal worth 10%, the same on all types of projects. Progress, 10%. That includes this early demo, but is also about how you manage your time, how you interact with your supervisor, etc. It's the progress you make with your project. The report, in general, is worth 70% for the build and design project. So that's the most significant part of the project, as you might expect. And then the viva is worth 10%, unless you're doing a research project, in which case it's got 20%, and the report is 60%. The viva is, so at the end of your, by next May, you will do a short oral presentation of what you've done in your project, and your second marker and first marker will ask you questions on it. One of the things they're looking to do is to make sure that what you report on is something you've done. So one of the things they might do, for instance, is get you to go through some of your code, maybe change it and show that you know where in the code to change it. I've had several projects in the past where somebody sat down and said, this is my software, and I'll say, so how would you change the colour of that bit of script? And they spend the next 10 minutes scrolling backwards and forwards through the code, and you know they've got no idea about the software. They presented somebody else's software. So those things are what we then find out about in the viva. It's not just for that purpose, but it's one of the things that is worth you understanding. So in terms of projects, you have a number of deliverables. The proposal, 1,500 to 3,000 words, which is due in 2.5 weeks. The early prototype, which is just something that you demonstrate to the supervisor. It's usually a 10 or 15 minute session. It's got to be done by the 18th of December. So we don't have a specific timetable, we just have a deadline when it's got to be completed by. And that, as it turns out, of course, is the end of this year's worth of academic teaching. So if you haven't finished it by then, you're into holiday period anyway. Your final report, somewhere between 12,000 and 18,000 words, needs to be delivered early April. And the viva, it's a 30-minute interview for those that do build and design, and it's a 60-minute with a 30-minute presentation and a 30-minute interview for those that do a research project. These are all in the module guide, so these are just things I'm going through. We built a set of descriptors to try and clearly distinguish between build projects and design projects in particular, because people are confused about what a build project means and what a design project means. So a build project, okay, there's lots of overlap, there's lots of similarities, and that maybe is part of where the confusion comes. This is how the marks are allocated within the marking scheme for the project. So the introduction and literature review is worth 10% of the overall report mark. From that, you should be able to give the background to the project, its motivation, why you're doing it, its aims and objectives, some idea of what the deliverables are, competing similar systems, other technologies, the platforms that you might use to develop your solution with, and the scope of your project. That's followed by a standard analysis. How do you break down what the problem is that you're trying to solve, what previous solutions might be? And for that, there are a whole range of tools. And as I say, the expectation is that you know which tools to select and how to apply them properly. In the design, you should have a process model, some sort of sequence diagram, wireframes, some system architecture. You should be using, if you've got some data that you're working with, at least a database, how you design data structures and what the data structures need to do. And one of the things that I'm afraid is one of my own bugbears is that people often don't put a narrative with lots of the things they put in their project. They think, I've got lots of diagrams, I'll put those diagrams up in a few tables, that's all I need, that was my design. But it's not. The way that you achieve a design is through a set of explicit decisions. And you need to make those decisions clear, because it's part of what we mark. So try and make sure when you report on things that you have a narrative that goes with them. So the design is 20% on a build project, 30% on the implementation. You can see where the weighting occurs. So we're expecting now that the elements that you use in an implementation, whether you're using libraries, how you're designing interfaces, how you implement the functionality, how you go about identifying the right coding principles that you're going to apply. All of those things are all part of what we're looking to give you marks for within the implementation. And then the final 20%, sorry, that's not the final 20%, if you can add up these come to 90. The critical review is worth 10%, but the critical review is the same across all projects. Is how you test your ideas of what you've implemented. How effectively do you know that what you've written actually works the way you hope it will work? And that requires some formal testing process. Whether it be white box or black box, or whether you go through user testing, all of those things are how you understand how effective what you've actually written is. Design project, you can see, I hope immediately, where the different weightings now come in. So the introduction of literature review, the understanding of the depth of knowledge of how a project's been implemented now is front-loaded. And so we can see here rather more critical analysis of previous systems and what you're trying to do. In the analysis part, you should be expecting to use a wider range of tools and in perhaps a slightly more sophisticated manner to make sure they properly apply the principles that you're looking to determine for this project. The design itself is now the 30% element, is the largest part. And so the way that you take a problem and look at it and solve it from end to end all comes out then in the design process. The implementation now is only worth 10%. Now, that's a slightly false view, because it doesn't really mean if you don't do an implementation, you'll just lose 10%, because actually the overall aspects of the implementation run through the project of being able to validate your design principles. But actually when we come to market, there will be a section for which you get that 10%. But the process of you being able to demonstrate the project also appears in both analysis and design. So just leaving out the implementation is not the same as just missing that 10%. So that's why I urge you not to do that. In many cases, unless it's a really good design project, something that doesn't demonstrate and provide empirical evidence of what you've actually tried to achieve doesn't support your case. And that's what you're looking to do in the project. So what differentiates a build from a design? The first 2 points is that a design project is not an incomplete build project. When you get to March and you haven't done any implementation and you say, oh, I'll make this a design project, that's easy to do. It's not. Well, it's easy, it just doesn't get you any marks. But it's not an uncommon thing to do. And why is it not uncommon? Because people don't manage their time well. And they get to March and they haven't done any implementation. So don't fall into a trap, but it's not sufficient for you to give in the design part of a build project and expect it to be marked in the same way. You'll be lucky if it passes, if it gets 40%. And it will still need to be quite good to do that. Because it inevitably will not have the depth of analysis and design that you apply if you're just doing a design project. So try not to fall into that trap. And certainly, as I say, we expect an implementation of some sort and some sort of evaluation. But a design project really follows very clear design principles from end to end of the system you're designing. It has a clear narrative on those, how those principles are applied and what you get from those, and demonstrates then through the implementation what aspects of the design you're actually looking to bring out. And from that generates empirical evidence Things where you've actually done something and can show how they work, and hence how your design principles have been applied. So that's the differentiation. Okay, lots of places where you can get information. I won't linger on this, having used up my time. But you should all be aware of where you can get information from. There's a set of lectures over the next 12 or 13 weeks. This list is on study space, so if you look under the information section on study space. But this, we formulated it as a how-to guide, because often people, having gone through, say, having done a module on databases, don't quite know how to do this or how to do that. The biggest bugbear I have with people with projects that use a database is that they spend all their time deciding how you can log into it in a slightly secure way and don't get any further than it. They don't get to actually manipulate the data. Some of you look at me disbelievingly, but I've had plenty of projects, as have all the other academics in the past, of people that just don't actually do anything with the database. They don't design and apply any of the principles they want. So if you want to do that, then Beryl's lecture on how to use databases in your project was a good one to attend. You may not think, and to some degree, not all of these lectures will be relevant to you. So there may be some that you don't attend. But try not get into a mode where you say, well, I'll go to the first couple and then just forget it. Because they are there to support you. And in the end, it's true to say, if you don't want to be supported, then fine. We can only make that facility and resource available. If you choose not to use it, then all you do is take the responsibility yourself to make sure that you can solve those problems. And then we go into the second week, the second semester, bunch of period in the middle there where it's not really worthwhile giving you lectures. If you haven't got the information by then you can't actually do your project. But at the end, some lectures on how to go about writing up your project. And there are also some faculty resources that are being made available. For some people, English is not their first language. So they struggle a bit with writing a 60 or 70 page document that's meant to be clear and concise. So there are particularly lectures available to help you with writing and creating your project. So if you think you need that support, then try and go along to these workshops as well. Okay, so I shall finish on my how to fail your project. I'm sure you're all well aware of how to do not well in the academic studies, but don't submit anything when the deadline comes. When we get to the 16th of October, just don't bother putting a proposal in. That works. That will get you 0 marks for that. Don't meet with your supervisor. He can't help you. He has no value in the project at all, so you don't need to do that. If you are going to submit work, do it the day before. Plenty of time available then, because it really doesn't matter very much. You know, writing an 18,000 word essay is relatively straightforward in only 3 or 4 days, as long as you don't actually eat, sleep, or do anything else. It just doesn't have any content. Of course, you can just take somebody else's work, and that really saves you a lot of time. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that you know anything. And it is very easy to detect. It really is. Ignore the project guidelines, don't take any notice. So write a project report up, and it's all going to be, I'm going to have 78 pages of background. No project at all. So look and see where the marks come from, talk about it with your supervisor, identify your strengths, and from that determine the type of project you're going to do, and make sure you go down that path correctly. And that's the same thing, don't plan your project. Just do it as it comes, day by day. When you get to a deadline, stick something in. Okay, I've finished my bit. And I did say I'd leave time for questions, but I never do. Have you got any questions? Yeah. Email me if you don't know at the moment. It may seem not so straightforward to you, but I've spent the last 2 months trying to find out who is a final year student, so I can allocate them a supervisor. And the problem is, a lot of students, there are people that are on courses that are meant to have a year of industrial placement that don't go on placement. And so the university doesn't tell me that they're going to be here until the very last minute. There are some other students that come in straight into our final year. They don't tell me about those until not even today, maybe next week. So if you haven't got a supervisor, or you don't believe you've been allocated a supervisor yet, email me and copy in JC, and we will get you one allocated in the next day or two. And then it's down to you to get in contact with them. Any more questions? Only around at the end, so if you've got things you want to save up until then fine. Okay?
Thank you, JC. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Hi, so I'm JC, and I guess that most of you know me. Last time I presented in this room actually was in April, where we started the final year project process. But also during the whole summer, I've met many of you discussing ideas and so on. And I realized that the concept of research projects was very unclear. And so that's why I would like to spend a bit of time now to tell you what exactly is a research project. And then we will spend a bit more time about your research proposal, which is your first deliverable in a bit less than 3 weeks. So first of all, we need to define the word research, okay? Because it's a word which is not used correctly in your day-to-day life. We speak about, yeah, I'm going to do a bit of internet research, or I'm going to do some research at the library. Okay? So that's the common way of using the word research. That's not the academic way. So if you want to do some internet research or research in the library, you should say, I'm conducting a literature review. Okay? That's the correct term. So when we are speaking about research in the context of this project, we are not speaking about that. Nothing to do with that. The scientific definition is to do a methodical study. So do you have a hypothesis, or you have a specific question you want to answer, and you are going to have some experiments in order to prove or disprove that hypothesis. Okay. And part of this process will be to do initially a literature review. It's only a very small part of the research project itself. So what is a research project, or what is research specifically in IT? Because when you think about research, you imagine those people, these crazy scientists in their labs, they mix some colorful liquids together, and there's an explosion at some point. Obviously, when you are dealing with IT, very few explosions are expected. But still, we are expecting to contribute to human knowledge. Okay? We want to make some discoveries. And since we are IT specialists, this is going to be done by doing some modeling, some simulation, to come up with some new algorithms, methodologies, or analyzing data in a new way. So let's look at an example of research project in computing science. So already when it's a research project, the title should be quite difficult to understand. Okay, it's already a first hint. If you don't understand the title, maybe it's linked to research. Okay? So that specific project is was trying to find a new way of representing data. Okay? So that the analysis of those data is a bit easier. So the first thing you have to do is to do a literature review. So you are going to learn about all the work that people have done around the world trying to deal with some data which are similar to your data of interest. Okay? So we are looking around, and we are looking at the best. So obviously we are looking at the work done at Kingston, but also working at the work done at the MIT. Okay? We are competing with the world. It's not just a Kingston thing, it's not a British thing. And following the literature review, we discovered that nobody had thought about representing the data in a specific manner. So our hypothesis was, let's try to represent the data that way. We feel that is going to work better than the traditional methods. So we came up with a new model. So obviously, we represented that model using some complex mathematics. And then using that model, we implemented it, and we performed some experiments. So our data are images, and we try to classify those images. So if you look at this image, you can see that the classification somehow is coherent. You have the different, the objects are being rotated according to a given angle, and you can see that there is some coherence between all those different objects. So visually, it looks like the idea that we have suggested may be good. It looks like, but that's not enough. You know, research is not to say, yeah, I'm the best. You have to prove it. So in order to prove it, we needed to evaluate it. So what we did, we looked at the work of all our competitors. How are the people working on those data doing? What is their accuracy in this classification thing? So the first line is our method, and we have two categories, and in one case we are accurate at 73%, other case we are accurate at 83%. We compare with our competitors, and we see that in particular in the second category, we are doing better than most of them. There's only one which is doing better in the second category, a bit less in the first category. So now it starts a discussion. Can we claim to be better than them? Or are we better in specific circumstances? Or maybe they are getting better results, but they need 1 week of processing, and we need half a minute. Okay? So being better is not just being more accurate. There are many different parameters. But in order to make any claim, we need to compare with the best in the world and then say, here are the numbers, and it's worth noting our method because in this specific context, we are better than anybody else. Okay? So that could be a research project in computing science. What about information system? There's a lot of research going on in information system as well. So in particular, that's a paper which was published last month, and they were dealing with the idea about software piracy. Okay? And the idea is, in some country, the state is quite lenient. Okay? They don't, if you download some video somewhere, they're not going to bother you. Or some other countries are going to give you a small fine, £10, £100, £10,000. Other country, you are just going directly to jail. Okay? So they wanted to understand what is the link between somehow the penalty and the amount of people downloading illegal stuff, and what is the cost for the economy. Because the most stuff you download, the more loss has the economy. On the other hand, if you want to monitor all the people, checking that they are downloading, it has a cost as well for the state. So you need to find the right balance. Okay? So again, they did a literature review. They look at what are the different models around. And they came up with a model, again, some interesting math, some probabilities. What happened? How many people are going to carry on downloading films if the penalty is going to jail? Okay? We could expect that the number will be much lower than if the penalty is £10. Okay? On the other hand, they also have some equation trying to understand what will be the cost for the economy if that amount of people are downloading illegally material. So they come up with this mathematical model. Then they do some simulation. They say, okay, what happens if the fine is £50? What is the cost for the economy? How many people are going to carry on downloading things? And then they are going to do some evaluation. They are going to say, okay, in the UK, the penalty is that. What our model is going to predict, what is the reality? And then they are going to go through a few countries and say, yes, our model represents pretty well the reality. Therefore, the UK government, if they want to reduce piracy, should increase the fine to that specific number. Okay, so that's an example of a IS research project. So, as I say, in a final year project, your aim is to deliver a contribution to human knowledge and discovery. It's only your aim, okay? Because you are going to start with some kind of hypothesis that usually is going to come from your supervisor. You are going to do your best to develop that hypothesis, to test it, and to compare it with the rest of the world. And if you go through this whole process and you demonstrate that the hypothesis was not good, that's okay, you get an A. Okay? You get a first-class mark. You have demonstrated that that was a bad idea. Okay? If you have gone through all the process, a lot of time will be saved in the whole world because people know that that idea is not good. Okay? On the other hand, if you are lucky or your supervisor had a good hint, they will come up with a new idea. It will demonstrate that in a particular scope, you are the best in the world, and that's fantastic. You have contributed to human knowledge, and people are going to use that idea for further development. Okay? So when you do a research project, you are going to do something that has never been done before. Okay? And sometimes you don't even know if it's possible to do it. Okay? But again, the important thing is the aim, to attempt to do it. Okay? If you demonstrate that it's not possible, that's fine, you also get an A. Obviously, in order to do that, usually you have to use the most advanced technologies. Okay? Because if it was something trivial, someone would have done it before. Okay? So you are going to use the latest stuff, possibly, in order to demonstrate that this idea is good. So doing a research project is quite scary because we don't know exactly where we go. We are going to do the most advanced stuff, the most complex stuff, but it's also exciting because potentially you are going to become a discoverer. So it's very challenging, but also it's rewarding. Okay? Your project is going to stay. Maybe you are going to publish your work in an international conference. You will be in a place like here with experts in your domain, and you are going to tell them the best way to deal with a problem. You will be the center of attention. You will be the expert. So obviously, if your ambition, for example, is to do research in the future, if you want to do a PhD or a master's by research, that's the type of project you would like to do. Because you want someone to pay you next year for doing a PhD. If this year you can demonstrate already that you are good at research, it's much easier to get that grant. Okay. So again, I would like to stress, doing a research project is not a literature review. I've met many people during the summer saying, yeah, I'm going to do a research project. I'm going to review the literature on that topic. And I say, that's not a IT project. That's a social science project, reading stuff. Okay? Here, you are supposed to demonstrate undergraduate skills. And since it's an IT degree, you are supposed to demonstrate some technical skills. Okay? So the technicals can be UML, they can be programming, they can be whatever you want, but there must be some advanced skills that you have learned during your 3 years. If you are not demonstrating those skills, you are not demonstrating you are worth an IT degree. So you are just going to fail. Okay? Because we have seen that the literature review is only worth 10 or 20% of your final mark. Okay, so as I said before, you may want to try to solve a problem that nobody has solved before, or develop some new, better, faster, more accurate algorithm or methodology. And you want to use maybe some very advanced techniques, such as artificial intelligence, to analyze a problem in a new way. Okay? So for example, an interesting research project would be an app which would take pictures only when people are smiling. Okay? At the moment, you have already an app which tells you where the face of the person is. Okay? Which ensure that when you take the picture, there is someone there. It's good. But I take pictures and my wife is always complaining. She's saying, you are taking pictures of me making faces, and she deletes them all the time. Okay? So I am very interested in an app which takes picture only when my wife is smiling. Okay? That would be great. It doesn't exist. It's very complex. You need some skill in image processing. You need some skill, I guess, in artificial intelligence, so that you can analyze. So you start from the literature review. The common state of the art is, or you can get the face of the person. It's a good start to know if that person is smiling, if you have already the face. Okay? But then you have the next stage. You need to do some image processing of what's inside that box and determine if it's smiling or not. Okay? So that would be a great research project, and I would buy your app. Would make my life much easier at home. So how to get started if you really want to do a research project? So first you need to understand if you have the right profile. Okay? If you want to do a research project which will involve programming, for example, you need to be an excellent programmer. Okay? The time you are going to spend on the project is not going to be improving your programming skills. It's doing stuff that has never been done before. So we are assuming that you are already excellent in that domain and you want to go to the next stage. Okay? So you must have excellent technical skills. Otherwise, you are just going to fail it. Okay? I mean, every year there are students doing a research project, and the distributions of mark is very interesting. Many of them will get an A. Many of them will get a B because they did some great research and didn't manage to write a good report. Okay? Because they are very different skills. So some people are very good at the technical skills, not very good at writing. So at the end, they just got a B. And then the third category is people just fail. You know, it was too hard. You know, for that research project, you needed to do artificial intelligence. They couldn't get artificial intelligence working. They didn't get anything, and they failed. Okay, so there are very dangerous types of projects. So you need to make sure that you are the right type of people. So when someone comes to me and says, JC, I want to do a research project with you, I spend the first 20 minutes try to dissuade them. Say, it's not for you. Are you sure you will manage? Because if you don't do that, I will fail you. I must fail you. Okay? Are you really an A programmer? You know, all those questions. And at the end, if they are still okay, let's speak about the research project now. So, again, the research project is about dealing with one of the current challenges, technical challenges. It's very unlikely that the student will know about the latest technology or techniques in a specific field. So, in 99% of the cases, the project has to come from the supervisor. You know, they know what is the state of the art, and they will tell you, currently, that's the problem that everybody is trying to solve. There are some good ideas around, but nobody has managed to do it. I have an hypothesis, maybe we can do it together. Okay? So if you want to do a research project, don't do it on your own. That means you are going to fail. You need to be working closely with your supervisor. Okay? Because most lecturers at Kingston, you know, they are doing research at international level. Maybe you are not aware of that, but that's the case, most of us. And obviously, we will be doing research in a very specific topic. Tim Ellis said, I do research in computer vision, and he's one of the world experts on that topic. Okay. We have world experts in many fields, so you need to pick the right person for that. Okay, so any question about the research project? Otherwise, I'm going to now tell you more about the research proposal itself in details, because as Tim said, it's expected in a bit less than 3 weeks. Okay, so the deadline, it's very simple, is the 16th of October, just before midnight. Okay. And we were expecting an electronic submission using Turnitin. So we don't need a paper copy, we are not interested in that. So what is a project proposal? Many students believe that the start of the project, no, it's not the start of the project, it's the end of the initial process, okay? Because the project started a very long time ago, okay? We met in this very room 6 months ago. The other room, okay. We were in the other room 6 months ago. Tim, myself, and other lecturers were here 6 months ago. And we told you, now that's the time to start your project. So in principle, you have already done 6 months on your project. So we are not at the start at all, okay? Some people have done much more than 6 months, you know. Some students, you know, since they've been young teenagers, they have this idea, you know. I have these video games that I want to build, and I need to get the skills, and that's why I'm going to study IT. So those people, they've been thinking about their project for years. And now the final year project is finally the time to realize that dream. Okay? So it can be a piece of software, it can be a new type of e-commerce. Many students, I'm sure there are many in this room, have been with that idea in their head for years. Okay? So for them, the project has started a very long time ago. So hopefully, at least most of you will have started the project 6 months ago when we met first. And when I told you, you need to start thinking about ideas. Some people haven't started yet for good or bad reasons. So they have only 3 weeks, okay, to get this project proposal. So the process is that you have been thinking about those projects, and then you have contacted your supervisor, because you need to check if your project is suitable first for an IT degree, okay? So is the project viable, you know? I mean, if you want to do a literature review on the marketing of iPhone in the UK, that's a very interesting project. It has nothing to do with an IT degree at Kingston University. That's a great idea, you do it well, you fail. It's not IT, okay? That's social science, or maybe business, okay? So you need to make sure that your project is something we are going to recognize for your degree. So if you have a project idea, the first thing is go to your supervisor and say, is that a valid project for my degree? Okay? Then we need to understand the complexity. I mean, it's going to be your largest project until now, so it's very difficult for you to have an assessment about how complex it is, how much time I will need for that project. Fortunately, your supervisor, they've already supervised, I have supervised hundreds of projects. So now I have quite a good idea about how much time you will need in order to achieve what you are proposing, okay? So you're going to come with a project, and I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry, that's a great idea, but you will need 5 years for doing that. So it's not a good final year project. So maybe we are going to do only part of it, or maybe we need to change it completely because it's not appropriate. Sometimes it's the opposite. They come to me and say, yeah, I would like to do a simple website for the local takeaway shop. I just want to use a bit of HTML, a bit of PHP, and that's it. And I look at the complexity of the project and say, yeah, that's a 2 weeks project. You know. So you are not going to pass with a project which can be achieved in 2 weeks. Yeah? So apart from the initial idea, we need to understand what is the complexity of the project. Another aspect is, are you the person which is right for completing that project? Okay? Maybe now you are thinking, yeah, I would like to do this app detecting smiles. I will say, okay, what are your skills in image processing? Possibly none. Are you really keen on learning on that? Do you know that in image processing there are quite a lot of mathematics? Is that a problem, or are you going to run away because you don't like math? Okay. So then we need to find if the project match your skills or the skills that you are ready to acquire. And also there is the issue about what is your ambition. Like Dimitrios Makris, when a student comes to me, I say, what mark do you want for your project? And many students say, yeah, I want an A. And they say, yeah, I want to do this small thing, and say, no, that's not an A project. You know, the complexity is not very high. You are using that techniques which not very advanced. You know, such type of project, yeah, you can certainly have a pass, but you will never get an A. It's too easy. And sometimes it's the opposite. You know, I have a student saying, you know, I'm really struggling at home. I am responsible of my whole family. You know, I have a full-time job, and my ambition, you know, is just to pass the project. You know, I cannot do more. I cannot, and I understand that, and I respect it. And we are going to design together a project which allows them to pass, because that's what they want to do. You know, and it would be crazy to not take care of their family because of a stupid project. Okay. So what is important for them is take care of their family, get their degree at the end, and that's it. So there is no point trying to ask them to get an A project. So if you are in this situation, be very clear with your supervisor. So I'm not going to judge you. I mean, they fully understand your constraints, and they are going to design the right project according to the effort, your ambition, and your skills. Okay. So that's one good reason to meet your supervisor early. Okay? Make sure that all those boxes have been ticked. Otherwise, it's not a project for you. So this, after meeting your supervisor, very often you have to go back to the drawing board, because hopefully you need to refine the project. Maybe you need to change it completely. Very often you just refine it, you know. Yeah, it's a bit too easy. Maybe you could add that. And then you're going to write a draft research proposal. So, you know, ideally, I would like all my students to send me the draft research proposal of their project next Monday. So I have time to mark it, not to mark it, to give it some feedback. I will need a few days for that, you know, especially because I'm supervising 10 students. You need to realize that I'm supervising 10. So I'm not going to respond, you know, in half an hour about your proposal. So I will need a few days. I will send you my comments, and you will need a few days to act on those comments. Okay? If I tell you, yeah, but you need to investigate a bit more on that, because I'm not sure that this technology is available, it's free, and so on, you need to have a bit of time to investigate so that you can produce your final proposal that I will mark, that your supervisor will mark. Okay? So again, it's always a good idea to send a draft to your supervisor, because the supervisor will be the person marking it. So if they tell you I would like that, it's a good idea just to follow their instructions, because then they give you a good mark. Okay? So please don't send your final proposal without having shown it to your supervisor. You know, that doesn't make sense. but give them a bit of time to read it, because it's expected that most of the students will send it 3 days before the deadline, and the supervisor will say, sorry, I don't have time to read them. So again, use this feedback because you really need it. So the proposal itself, it's a cover sheet, a content between 1,500. All the slides will be on study space shortly. Will be content between 1,500 and 3,000 words. It's worth 10% of your final mark, so a good way to start the year. So here is the cover sheet. Okay, so you just have to fill in the yellow bits. On what degree are you? Your name and details. What is your project title? What project type are you going to choose? Is it design, build, or research? Who is your supervisor? And then there's a couple of boxes at the bottom saying, have you discussed your project with your supervisor? And secondly, have your supervisor reviewed your draft? So it's not only for checking that you are working properly and that your time management is fine. I mean, it's one reason, so that your supervisor at the next meeting can say, you see, you didn't get a good mark, but we didn't discuss it beforehand. You already have a time management problem. But also is to detect supervisors who are not doing their job, okay? Because we are all humans, and maybe for any reason, the supervisor is not going to give you the feedback you need, okay? They are always busy. That's not acceptable, you know. They are paid in order to help you. So if there is a problem, your supervisor is never there, or doesn't treat you well, let me know, and we will speak to them, okay? Because that's not acceptable. But this cover sheet is basically a commitment. I'm going to do that project, it will be of that type, okay? And that's not going to change. Okay, so now if we look at the content of the proposals, you have 6 sections, and it's a good idea to have those 6 titles in your proposal, okay? Some students like to restructure everything. It's not a good idea, you know. I'm going to mark it, also following those 6 points. So if I don't find one point, I will be tempted to put 0 for that point, even if it's hidden in the text. Don't make life difficult to the marker, okay? So first of all, we would like an abstract. So it should tell us about the context of the project, what is the problem, and the proposed solution. It's not, yeah?
You know, if you take a project that's already on study space, can you just copy paste it? Like, you know what I mean? It's like a supervisor proposal down.
Yeah, no, that's plagiarism.
Oh, okay.
So you can reuse the material,
Yeah.
express it in your own words, but it needs to be your own words. Okay. So the abstract is not very long, it's 10, 20 lines. Okay. So here is an example of a project. The context is there are cameras everywhere in the streets of London. Okay. That's the thing. And are these cameras useful? Can they detect crime? Okay, that's the question, that's the context. So the problem is that all the studies so far only showed some very constrained environment. Okay, there's just a person walking in front of the camera, and in that case, algorithms work very well. But when it's a crowded environment, very few people publish data about that. They don't publish it because they don't test it, or because they are so bad that they don't want to tell it. Okay, so that's the problem. So the solution is doing a little literature review, pick up the method which looks the most promising, implement it, and then test it, so that now we can know how good they are on a real type of data sets. Okay. So in the introduction and background section, you should answer a list of questions. I mean, obviously, we don't want bullet points. Okay, it needs to be a text. But all those points should be covered if relevant. So many of you will have a client. So we want to know who is your client. What do they do? And what do they want? Okay. Who are the stakeholders? Who is interested in your project? And what is the general topic? Is it e-commerce, computer vision? Is it artificial intelligence? Give us some idea about what is the field of your project. So what problem will you address and why is it important? Okay, so the problem I want to address is find smiles on faces. And very important because I want to keep JC's marriage happy. Okay, that's very important. So what are the benefits to the stakeholders? And how does it relate to previous work on it? What have been done so far which is related to your project? And what are you going to add to what is currently existing? So here you could say what is related is there are those software which is give you this little box around the face. That's already a very good start, for my project. So it's only a project proposal, so you don't need to have a fully fleshed literature review. Okay? If you have a couple of pages about other systems and so on, it's okay. Okay? We just want to make sure that you have some understanding about the context, who is around. Okay? It doesn't need to be exhaustive at this point. Then you need to provide your aims and objectives. And very often students are a bit confused. What's the difference between an aim and an objective? Okay. In the academic context, they are very different. So the aims, they are broad statements of desired outcome. Okay. So my aim is to detect smile in a picture. Okay. And it's the end product, what you want to achieve. It's not how to get there. And then you have the objectives, which are step by step. First objective, if I want to detect a smile, first I want to load a picture. Secondly, I want to detect the face. Third, I would like to detect maybe the mouth. Finally, I want to detect what is the position of that mouse. Okay, so that's the different technical objectives. First, I need to do that, and that. And objectives needs to be smart. Okay, so they need to be specific. You need to understand what you are supposed to achieve. It cannot be fuzzy. Yeah, I do some kind of image processing. No, that's not good. I want to isolate the head. That's a specific objective. It must be measurable. How do we know that it's completed? Achievable, you don't want a project to have only one objective, which is the final. You need to go step by step so that we understand that you can go from one step to the next. And again, it needs to be realistic. Okay? Can you really do that? Do you have the data for doing that? Okay? And something is about time. Is it reasonable to have such an objective for the next 2 months? Or maybe it's too much. So you need to cut your objectives in smaller objectives. You need also to mention technologies and resources. What kind of resources you will need to achieve your project. If you want to do some e-commerce project, you will need some kind of products. Do you have already a database of products? Who is going to provide this database? Does it exist? Do you need to pay for it? Do you need to create it yourself? We need to understand that to see if your project is possible. Okay. And what technology are you going to use? Do you want to use PHP, HTML, Java, whatever? You know, it doesn't need to be definite, but we want to have an idea that, okay, that makes sense. It could achieve that project using those different technologies. Okay. So where will the data come from? So you need to basically convince the reader that you are able to complete that project, that you have some understanding of what is required from a technical point of view. And as I said, that can be a first thing. You know, I've already found a first set of data. They are not perfect, but I could do the project with that. And I aim to look for better data during the project. But at least you have already the data which allow you to do your project. Obviously, you will need to choose a method. So you have many methods that you have seen during these years. Which one is appropriate to your project and why? And then you need also to have some kind of work plan. We have said previously that planning is really essential, time management. So in your proposal, I would like some kind of Gantt charts or some very specific tasks for maybe every month. That's not enough. Okay, I want to go in a much higher degree of details. That's just the task that we give you. You are the project manager, so you are going to create many other tasks. And so what are going to be the deliverables? Okay, so as Tim said before, maybe the deliverable is that you are going to produce the user interface for your website. Maybe initially it's not connected to any database or anything, but initially you can already provide the user interface. That's the first deliverable. You need to discuss about ethics. Okay? Don't forget that you are going to become, in less than a year, IT professionals. You will be on the market and you will be looking for jobs. So now you are going to move to the real world, and you cannot just say, oh, ethics I'm not interested in. It's something for lawyers. No, it's something for you. So if your project requires human subjects or human data, then we need to check if you are allowed to use those data. Okay. You are not allowed to go in the street and take pictures of people and then say, yeah, take that for my project. So if you use that type of data, you need to contact us. There's already a document on Study Space telling you what we want to know and make sure that you are going to do the thing in an ethical manner. And that will have to go through a committee saying, yeah, that's a proper use of the data. Okay. So keep that in mind as well. Keep that in mind that it can be refused. Okay? If you want to use data dealing with children, it's going to be more complicated than if you are dealing with data of consenting adults. Okay? So you will need to have a very good reason why you want to use children's data. Okay? If you are using surveys, questionnaires, there are also some ethical issues. Okay? Anything needs to be anonymized and so on. Some people are doing their project for a company, and they plan to sell the product. Okay, that's great, and hopefully they will give a bit of the money to the student as well. So in that case, there are some intellectual property rights. Okay, to make sure to understand who has the right of the technology, the design, which have been developed during that project. So there needs to be an agreement between the company, the students, and the university to see that everything is set properly. Also, if you are really keen to make money of it, maybe it needs to be confidential, okay? Because by default, you are doing your project, these projects are going to be put on Turnitin, all the lecturers will see your project, they will mark them and so on. If it's commercially sensitive, you don't want that. You don't want to share your project with that many people, okay? So you will need to share your project, because if we cannot mark you, it's not a valid project, okay? So again, there needs to be some kind of agreement, but in the past, we had some agreements with the company, the students at the university. Okay, your project will be only visible to the people marking the project at the university. So 2 or 3 people, that's it. Okay, and they sign a piece of paper saying that they will never say anything about the content of that project, apart from marking it. Okay, so if this is the case, again, that needs to be discussed, and you need to make that decision very quickly, because everything which is put on Turnitin is shared with the rest of the world. So if your proposal is sensitive, don't submit it on Turnitin. Contact us well in advance, okay, because that's not an excuse for not submitting on time, and tell us, you know, it's commercially sensitive, I would prefer submitting a paper copy so that only one person sees it, and so on. Very often the proposal is not that detailed, so it's not commercially sensitive, okay? But the final report is, okay? So maybe there is no need to rush and worry too much at the proposal level, but you need to think about it before submitting your report. So the marking criteria, as I said, we will be going through all those points, and you will be marked accordingly. We have already mentioned plagiarism, so you know it's a serious academic offense. Turnitin is one of the tools we use. And here is the result of Turnitin report from last year's projects. Okay, so there are final year projects which were sent last year, and we can see that the one candidate had a plagiarism of 79%. I don't remember if they were kicked out of the university or if they were asked to come back, to get a 0 and come back, okay? There was someone at 62 as well, at 51, and so on, okay? I mean, sometimes there is a large amount, there are large amounts because people have a lot of references. So obviously your references, they are the same everywhere, so they can't have plagiarism. Turnitin detect them, so we look at the document and say, no, that's not plagiarism, that's a reference, so that's okay, okay? Or sometimes people put in appendix some documents which are not theirs, but it's clearly said, you know, that, and that's not a problem. So some people have a high number, but actually when you look at it, it's not plagiarism, okay? So don't worry too much about it. If you do it honestly, there is no problem. But if we look at the guy with 62%, that's one page of the report, and Turnitin say, okay, this section, this red section, we found it in a report at this university. This one, we have found it in the report of another university. This, so that's King's College. So the guy has been through many final year projects of other universities, and have done a bit of cut and paste. And that's their project, okay? So, you know, they try to be clever. They change one word here and there, so hoping that Turnitin will not get you. It will get you, okay? So you need to be aware that Turnitin is doing a good job. We are not going to follow Turnitin blindly, okay? If the number is high, we will go through the document and we will look at each paragraph like that and say, oh no, that's a quote, and it has been cited properly, so there's no problem. Okay, but we will go through it. So I have a few slides about referencing so that you don't do any plagiarism. So I leave them on my slides, and you can have a look at them if you are not quite sure. And we'd like to wish you good luck with your project proposal. And if you have general questions, you can ask. If you have personal questions, you can come down and